Hello and welcome to the Play Review with me, Douglas Schatz.
And me, Jodi Rylett.
Hi, Jodi. Welcome back from your holiday.
Hi, Douglas. It's lovely to be back.
We're straight back onto it today with reviews of two shows. The first is Accidental Death of an Anarchist, which is currently playing at the Theatre Royal Haymarket. Accidental Death was originally written in 1970 by the Italian playwright Dario Fo and his wife Franca Rame, in response to a high-profile scandal about the death of a prisoner in police custody in Milan. This production is a brand new adaptation written by Tom Basden and directed by Dan Raggett, which updates the setting and the scandal at the center of the play to modern-day London. I was fortunate enough to talk with Tom and Dan in depth about the original play and their new adaptation in the latest episode of the Play Podcast. Another plug, Jodi.
Of course.
So once you've heard Jodi and I share our thoughts on the production, you might be inspired to dive deeper into the play with Tom and Dan. Our second show today is The Pillowman by Martin McDonagh, which is currently running at the Duke of York's Theatre in the West End, with Lily Allen and Steve Pemberton heading the cast. Although it is also set in a police station, curiously, this is altogether a different tone of show from Accidental Death. And I'm fascinated to hear what Jodi made of this one, as I know that McDonagh's black comedy is not to everyone's taste. So, first, Accidental Death of an Anarchist. Jodi, what did you think of this one?
Well, I'm very pleased I fitted this one in. I really wanted to see it when it was on at the Lyric in Hammersmith, and I was at the height of directing Mayfly. I just couldn't fit it in. And then I just heard one better review after another from friends, and then it transferred, and I managed to get a ticket, and I managed to get a really good price for the ticket as well, which is always a blessing when it's a West End transfer. So yeah, I absolutely loved it. It was an exhausting ride literally from the opening second right the way to the end. And I'm sure I missed a good amount of the jokes because they were coming so thick and fast. I'd go and see it again, definitely.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's stuff that I'm sure I missed. In fact, we talked about the pace of the show with Dan in the Play Podcast, and he basically said it doesn't matter if you don't get it all. The pace is important. And it is just astounding, the pace of the show. And in particular, of course, Daniel Rigby's performance as the maniac is astounding, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's as close to a real use of the word genius I think I've seen on stage. I mean, he just holds that from start to finish, that incredible pace and the chaos of it.
Yeah.
He's called the Maniac, which has got to be the best name of any character ever. And he just embodies that. He is chaos from the second he walks on that stage till the moment the lights go down. And it felt, and I'm sure it felt improvised, it felt fresh, it felt a bit dangerous, it felt anarchic. You felt like you didn't know what was he going to do next, and how were these characters around him going to respond to it.
You're right, though, that he has complete command. It is chaos, but actually it's totally controlled chaos.
Yeah.
He is in complete command. He has this extraordinary verbal and physical precision. I mean, because the language is going at an amazing clip, and yet it's so precise and quite sophisticated, in fact. But the physical comedy is also astounding. There's this moment, a rare occasion in the theater, I would suggest, where time almost stops when he is holding the audience in complete thrall while he tries several different ways to climb down off a table. It's the most fantastic feat of physical comedy that you will see in a long, long time, isn't it?
It really is. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. I couldn't believe what we were seeing. All he was trying to do was get off a table. And you're right, he had us in the palm of his hand, and he milks every joke, physical or verbal, to the point when you think it should stop being funny. But the genius of it is that it doesn't stop being funny.
No. And that's another thing that Dan said in our other conversation, was that, you know, when you hit the sweet spot of comedy, it just rolls. You're just caught in it, and the laughter is just continuous. One of the other things that really interested me is that the maniac, as you said, basically orchestrates this show. And that's important because there's a lovely conceit where he breaks the fourth wall. and is talking to us as the audience. But he's doing that in a way where the other characters are oblivious to that exchange. They are not in on this joke, that this is a show, self-consciously a performance. And it's a bit like pantomime, which they acknowledge as well.
Yeah.
Where he interacts with the audience. But this is important to the theme of the show as well, because it puts him in a position, and us, where we're aligned with him as he essentially is skewering the police, right? He's taking the piss out of the police, and we are in the know and watching him do this while the police and the other characters are completely oblivious to that.
Yeah, and I think the cleverness in the writing is that it's entirely consistent with the world of the play as well, because what the other characters are seeing is somebody who has a known mental illness. So he's declared this up front, that he has this diagnosed illness where he believes that he is constantly in a theatrical performance.
Yes.
So they're looking at him knowing that he thinks there's an audience there because he's, absolutely cuckoo. And it plays so beautifully. And it really rewards the theatre going audience as well, with, lots of theatrical references. And it's so clever the way that the police station, that setup of that room, feels so real. It feels so like those public buildings that you have, even down to, I don't know if you noticed, but like halfway up the wall, they had one of those like plastic skirtings that they had the electric sockets in.
Yes.
Like in schools that were built in the 70s and 80s, that's just a real idiom of that architecture. And so that was all very, very real. And then just only occasionally a little bit of funny theatre would happen with the set. Like when they moved in the world of theatre from the 3rd floor to the 4th floor.
Yes.
And he changes a digit on the wall and then goes over to the very important window as if he's opening a blind. But what happens is the backdrop moves as if they're going up in a lift. I mean, that was just very, very witty, I thought.
Theatrical genius, that moment, I thought. It's so simple, but the backdrop moves. So the view out the back window changes, simulating the fact that you're now a floor higher, which is just perfect.
It's perfect. And they didn't overdo that. I think had they done more of that kind of thing, we would have been less convinced that the police officers thought they had a lunatic on their hands. We'd have been less convinced that they weren't in on this game and knew that we were there as an audience as well.
Dan and Tom were saying as well that it's not completely disconnected from reality, although it is farce and the maniac's behaving like a maniac. And in fact, there are all sorts of fantastically funny and completely crazy, frankly, things that go on, as they do in farce, with wigs and wooden legs and slapstick comedy and all those sort of things.
Yeah.
But they were saying that they wanted to retain a degree of reality because, and this is one of the other important things about this play and about Tom's adaptation, is the way that he injects serious points into the play. There are a plethora of topical satirical targets that is a shot at in passing, in the way that pantomime throws in references to the news of the day, but this in a more serious satirical way, including, things like the cost of living crisis, the new Public Order Act, even restricting protests. And there's this wonderful moment I enjoyed anyway, a nod to the Home Secretary being down in Dover, popping dinghies crossing the channel with a BB gun.
And that was just a nanosecond of delivery in the midst of a ton of other stuff. You could have so easily missed it. And just as you're laughing at it and registering it, he's moved on to the next thing.
Absolutely. I thought the genius of it is that he's just slipping all this stuff in. It doesn't stop the comic flow ever, really. And I think this is one of the important points I was going to ask you about was, how do you think this works, this balance of the serious and the farcical? Because there are serious points. For example, the most important thing is the behavior of the police is the primary target, of course, and in all sorts of respects. Their misogyny, their lack of diversity, and most particularly, of course, taking the lead from the original play, The Death of the Anarchist in Police Custody. The maniac tells us, I think, at one point that 1,861 people have died in police custody or following contact with the police in England and Wales since 1990. And this is rising as we speak, as Dan reminded me when we spoke together as well. I would hazard to suggest, Jodi, that this comes as a bit of a shock to the audience.
Yeah.
And of course is part of the point of Tom's update and the original play, to convey some serious political points within the form of comedy. Do you think this works?
Yeah, the measure of whether that is successful is the extent to which you as an audience member feel some discomfort. And I definitely felt that because it was so contrasted with you're having a great fun night at the theatre and look at that silly man doing the silly things, ha ha ha. And then this skewering would come. And it was almost that the laugh was still in your throat and the smile almost froze on my face a couple of times.
Yeah.
And then I would swallow the laugh down as this bit would be delivered. And then he was on to another joke and I was laughing again. And it's like, I'm still processing what he's just said about this shocking statistic. And that's not funny. And then a second later, I'm laughing again. So I thought that it was successful because it kind of mirrors what we do. I mean, I was, like many people, completely outraged at the whole handling of the Sarah Everard murder and the protests afterwards, and then one thing after another just kept coming out and yet you're outraged and you sort of shake your head and isn't it dreadful, but what have I done?
Mm-hmm.
Not done a thing. And I think that is precisely what is being mirrored by this play. So farce can be really underestimated as a form, and I know that I always say, it's not my favorite, but whenever I go and see a farce, the genius of it strikes me and I laugh my head off and have a great night out. So I think it's a brilliant form to do something so serious in.
Yeah, Dan and Tom and I had an extensive conversation about Dario Fo's original intent in writing the farce as he did, with a very serious intent at the time, because he was trying to counter what was going on in the state-controlled media, that people weren't getting the truthful information about the incident that occurred there. And also the arguments that Fo makes and Tom reiterates, that it's important to be engaged in the theater, clearly, and entertainment is part of being engaged. And so these points are going to land if you're engaged. And there's an idea that you will still walk away. It's their attempt to lodge these points in us in some way, to raise this awareness. And I think that's been effective, because this statistic keeps coming back in my head.
Same.
And I never knew any of this.
No, same. And I heard it also in the interval and at the end when people were talking about it. And I heard somebody on the phone afterwards saying how it was great fun, but it really didn't pull its punches.
Yeah, exactly. I also was intrigued by the ending of the play because, without giving too much away, this piece is also, as you suggested earlier, in numbers of ways, very cleverly structured. Because what it does is it replicates the original scenario of the anarchists' defenestration, great word, and in the suggestion in the end that the whole cycle of corruption and cover-up endlessly repeats itself.
Yeah, here we go again. I thought that was just so well done, because it's true. Another death in custody, or another accusation of police brutality, or another
inquiry, and then
another inquiry. Oh, it's outrageous and it mustn't happen. And then it dies down and there's another news cycle and it's all forgotten, and then boom, it comes back up again.
Yeah, it's an extremely effective show. So overall, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. It's a fantastic adaptation, beautifully designed and performed, very, very funny. And as we said as well, in the best tradition of Fo's seriously scathing political theater, really.
Yeah.
The cast do a great job, I thought, in playing it completely straight, no matter how crazy it gets.
Yeah.
Which helps to make the serious points, because in the end, it's very much a case of the supposed madmen exposing the lunacy or absurdity of the language and logic of the real world, of the police and the system.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, that's kind of theatrical tradition, I suppose, isn't it? The fool that says the wise things.
Absolutely. Well, Tom and Dan talked about the maniac as being like Shakespeare's fool as well.
Okay, interesting.
So yes, well spotted.
Funny, very, very interesting. Before we move on, I do love a good set. Thought the set was smart. It could have been a very boring box set. I just liked the way that they moved it so that the corner of the set actually jutted out ever so slightly into the audience, a bit like a pointy finger. I mean, I sometimes read too much into these things, I don't know, but I did like that a lot.
And you were saying earlier about the decor, it's all very gray.
Yeah.
And the way the maniac writes in a marker pen all over the wall.
Why was that so funny? It's because we're so constrained by the rules and the way that we do things. So he goes to write on the whiteboard And then he just carries on beyond the whiteboard onto the wall. And it's the tiniest of subversive actions, but it felt really shocking. It's just so funny.
It's anarchic.
It is anarchic. It's just something you would never do.
Which is the word of the moment, anarchy.
Yeah.
So great. Go and see The Accidental Death of an Anarchist. It's running at the Theatre Royal Haymarket until the 9th of September. Right. To our second show, Jodi, The Pillowman by Martha McDonagh.
Yes.
So McDonagh is, of course, more famous now for his films, including In Bruges, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and The Banshees of Inisherin. But he began life as a playwright with work such as The Beauty Queen of Leenane, The Lieutenant of Inishmore, and more recently Hangmen, and A Very, Very, Very Dark Matter. It could be said that all of McDonagh's plays are very, very dark matters, as they are very black comedies, often featuring descriptions of or actual graphic violence. The Pillowman was written in 2004, and this revival is directed by Matthew Dunster, who also directed McDonagh's last 2 plays. The Pillowman is set in a fictional police state where a writer named Katurian, here played by Lily Allen, is being interrogated by the police because of her possible involvement in a series of gruesome murders that appear to be copying scenarios she invented in her short stories. The interrogation is not fun to watch, nor are the stories that are recreated on the stage through the play, one of which is called The Pillowman. I won't give any more away about the plot, but as you may glean, this is not a cheery piece, except that in McDonagh's hands, there is very much an unlikely tone of dark comedy running throughout. Now, Jodi, I believe that your son is a fan of McDonagh's, but that you may not be. So what do you make of this blend of the disturbing and the comic?
Yeah, I'm not a fan. And although having said that, I did see The Lieutenant of Inishmore and The Beauty Queen of Leenane, and I always laugh despite myself. He is funny. So I went to this one with a sense of more of duty because I wanted to have a night out at the theatre with Billy. Again, I liked it more than I thought I was going to. I laughed a lot, especially in the second half after the interval. I found it a lot more entertaining and fun than I thought I was going to, given the subject matter that it handles. Is it my favourite thing I've seen on the London stages recently? No. Was it still a decent night out at the theatre? Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to have some interesting discussion here then. I find it very challenging to reconcile. And clearly that's part of the point about how we deal with the violence we're shown, how we respond to it. And it's an uneasy laughter, as you say, despite ourselves, which is clearly deliberate on McDonagh's part. And it does raise interesting questions about where does the instinct for violence come from in some human beings? I mean, what compels men who have the power the police have, for example, and who exercise that to brutalize other human beings, or in other cases, people to abuse children or to murder people? And I also kept wondering, why is McDonagh so attracted to these subjects? He deliberately sets out to shock us with the stories of, or even showing, graphic violence. And yet he also turns it into an extreme joke. So I don't know, as you've said, is laughing one of the ways that we fend off the horror or the reality of violence, I suppose?
Perhaps. I mean, I think there's a lot that can be said about what he's trying to do. I just think that's making it more deep than it actually is, to be honest. I think really it's a bit shallow and titillating to use extreme violence in this way and dish it up as entertainment and try and serve it as something, oh, aren't we really being clever about it? You know, we are fundamentally fascinated by cruelty. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many police procedurals on TV about yet another serial killer, yet more brutal murders. You know, we have an endless appetite for it. This thrill seeking is in us as human beings. It's almost like we collectively seem to enjoy looking at horror, getting close to the most dangerous of situations, the most dangerous of people, and then sitting back in our safety knowing that it's not going to happen to us. So it is something that's innate in our human psychology for sure. And there is a thrill in the way that going on a roller coaster is a thrill. You feel like you're going to die, but you don't die.
Yeah.
And you get filled with all of those hormones of adrenaline and thrill seeking and the relief afterwards that you'll find. But I did feel like any attempt to serve this play up as a kind of protection of art, or saying that art is important and art must survive and writing is important, etc. I just felt that wasn't convincing to me, because Katurian is the writer and they are desperate to preserve their stories beyond their potential death.
Yeah, so he does make, as you say, this point in defense, or a champion art, I suppose, in that Katurian wants her stories to survive after her, no matter what these stories are about, of course. And I guess this is part of McDonagh's point, that he and any writer should be allowed to write whatever they want, no matter how disturbing.
Yeah.
But it seems slightly facile in the end, the point. And actually, I agree with you overall. And I'm inspired, or provoked, or prompted at least, to do more exploring of this, because I'm trying to understand, is there a depth to what McDonagh is doing here or not? Or is this somewhat gratuitous? And as you say, the fascination is interesting, because on the night I went, this theater was essentially sold out. And I was surprised by that, because you're thinking, what is attracting people to this? This is not an easy watch. And these are not cheap seats either, by the way.
No, they're not.
Obviously, McDonagh is well known now for his very successful films, which also have a blend of the dark and gruesome and the comic. But in a way, the stage is even more literally so. So, again, it's very difficult to reconcile those two things. And why is he doing what he's doing with this? What are the things you liked about it, the show?
So I really enjoyed Steve Pemberton as Topolsky.
Yeah, I agree.
One of the cops. I mean, he's always watchable. He seemed very at ease. He didn't seem to me like he was acting and being theatrical. It just felt to me like I was watching some world-weary, cynical policeman going through the business of his day. And his deadpan delivery of a lot of the jokes was so, he's bad cop, I'm good cop, by the way. It just really funny and, as I say, relaxed. So he was very easy to watch.
I would totally agree. He's very composed and convincing actor, isn't he? I have to say this. He felt like the grown-up in the cast to me.
Agreed.
There was one of the only genuinely emotional moments for me in the play, was when he refers to the fact that his son has drowned. And there's this moment of quiet pain from him that stood out as real against all of this other more graphic pain on show, which is utterly unreal.
Yeah, it is utterly unreal. But in a way, I suppose, I kind of liked that it wasn't real. So that made it bearable to watch. So for me, the most fun parts were when Topolsky and Ariel, the other policeman, their interaction, when they came back on, it lifted and there was an energy to it. And it was very, very enjoyable. I didn't love Lily Allen. I thought she was okay, but I thought she was outclassed by Steve Pemberton and some of the other cast members. She had this odd physicality. Her hands seemed to wave with delivery of every line. And her reactions didn't seem big enough to some of the horrors that were being revealed. Or indeed, I never felt at any stage like she was genuinely in fear of physical violence happening to her, or that she was genuinely in fear for her brother's life or her brother's safety. There wasn't enough depth to that for me.
I totally agree. It's funny you use the word okay. I have said to anyone who asked that, yeah, she was okay, but only okay. There was something really just flat about this performance overall. It just never lifted. It was kind of one note all the way through. And as you say, it wasn't really proportionate to what was going on. Although she was trying at times to emote in relation to the concern for her brother, it just didn't feel profound or that touching, really. It just wasn't deep or resonant enough. And as you say, outclassed, I think. What about the others?
Oh, actually, I tell you who I thought did a good job with a tough role was the actor who played, is it Michael, her brother?
Yeah.
Matthew Tennyson. He did a very good job, I thought, with a tough role, because he did a good job of playing this innocent and literal child man who's a bit capricious, because it turns he's sort of childlike and then he's very coldly hurtful. I think that's a tricky role to perform and quite hard to watch. I think he did that as well as he could.
Yeah, I think he gives a disturbing performance as the disturbed brother. I mean, he does it very effectively, but it felt slightly cliched.
Agreed. I think that's in the writing. And he wasn't just disturbed, he had been brain damaged. So it was physical as well as emotional, what had gone on with him. I did think that the violence in those stories, I mean, they're horrific. If I had read that play, I would not have gone to see it. But the way that they portray it, with a few very clever theatricals, they make it very much comic book type violence.
Yes.
And that made it bearable to watch. And I think that any other treatment of it would have made it impossible and unbearable to watch. This kind of cartoon violence actually kind of underlined, this is a story. Hello, it's a story. No need to set fire to anybody's books here. It's just an imagination. And, you look into the ancient tradition of old fairy stories. They were really violent and grotesque and horrific. So there's nothing new in that. So I thought that was well done.
I agree with you that the mimed reenactments of the stories by the silent members of the cast were theatrically very effective. And actually, to be honest, I enjoyed them more than most of the actual play.
Yeah, I think so too.
Partly because I was admiring the theatricality of it, but also I suppose it somehow ameliorates the graphicness of the violence or the horror of what's being told as a story. And as you said, the play is about storytelling. And it is fascinating how much of the play is taken up with us just sitting and listening to stories being retold.
Yeah.
So it does impress you with the age-old power of storytelling and us just listening while someone tells a story.
I was going to say that theme of storytelling also then blends into this whole idea of art. Is suffering essential to create great art? I'm not sure that I believe that it is, but then also, is it a deeper question that was provoked, I thought, by the play is it okay to destroy someone's art just because you don't like it? Just because you find it offensive? Isn't that where danger lies? It did address that. I thought it was a bit ham-fisted. I mean, there was an essay in the programme about totalitarian regimes, about the Ukraine war. And it was a very interesting essay, but part of me was like, what's that doing in here? I thought it was a very clumsy attempt to make it seem something more worthy than it actually was. I don't know about you.
Well, I think it goes back to our point about his championing the importance of art and to be able to challenge the state, for example. That's clearly an important principle to protect. I just felt, though, that it's something to do with the style of this, of course, is that there's a deliberate distancing going on, isn't there? That it is, as I said earlier, feels unreal. There is this sort of sense of emptiness. Is there a depth to this? That's a struggle I have in understanding what McDonagh's intent is and what the effect is ultimately. And I'm not sure overall, going back to your point, would I recommend people go and seeing this? Frankly, I'm not so sure because it's quite long.
It is quite long.
And I was not really enjoying myself. And then, okay, maybe you're not supposed to enjoy yourself, but it was hard work. And as we've said earlier about the Lily Allen performance, some of those things are just dragging on that I was just not getting much from, frankly, and felt quite distant from. So all in all, what it has prompted me to do is to go away and try and investigate a little further what McDonagh's intent and work is about. I've scheduled, in fact, Jodi, to record an episode of the Play podcast about the Pillowman with an expert, Eamon Jordan.
Oh, great.
Who is an academic who's written books on McDonagh's work. So I'm determined to understand what the dark, dark world of McDonagh is actually all about here.
Yeah, I will really look forward to listening to that, because the other two that I'd seen, The Beauty Queen of Linain and The Lieutenant of Inishmore, the violence in those stories felt more relevant to the story because they were either set in the Troubles, which is inherently violent, the casual nature of violence that can occur when you are living in what you think is a guerrilla war. And in The Beauty Queen of Linain, the violence that can ensue from intense family relationships, living in deepest, darkest rural island, feeling trapped and having to care for somebody that you don't particularly like. I mean, this sort of human response of violence to a certain situation, that felt to me very different to the kind of violence that was portrayed in this play. So I'd be really interested to hear what he has to say about, the full canon of work.
Yes, because there's obviously some common elements to this work, the violence in particular, even dismemberment as part of that. And primarily, of course, a question of tone. how it's both darkly comic and horrific at the same time. They're irreconcilable, and they leave us with this sense of unease, which irreconcilable things do.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what we're left with in terms of a review of Martin McDonagh's The Pillowman, which continues at the Duke of York's Theatre until the 2nd of September. What have you got coming up, Jodi?
I have only got one or two things. I'm going to see A Mirror at the Almeida Theatre. I don't know much about it, but I liked the concept when I saw a little trailer on that. And to be honest, I think that's all I've got upcoming.
Well, I'm off to see The Effect at the National next week. I saw the original there with Billy Piper and remember it as a very thought-provoking piece. So I'm looking forward to reacquainting myself with that.
Am I going to regret not seeing that? I don't know if I can go and see another Jamie Lloyd.
It's a very interesting play, I think. And I agree, I have mixed feelings about Jamie Lloyd, but I think it's a play worth seeing.
Good cast as well.
Yes, exactly. Okay, well, thank you once again, Jodi. Lovely to see you. And thanks, everyone, for listening to another play review. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please visit theplaypodcast.com to share your comments or email us at plays@theplaypodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.